Hello everyone, and welcome to War in Middle-earth, a series where I take you through all of the major wars and conflicts throughout the history of Middle-earth, from the First Age to the Fourth Age. In this episode, we look at the Disaster of Gladden Fields, one of the greatest tragedies of the Third Age. Although small in size, this battle would have dire ramifications that would shape the Third Age as we knew it. It's year 1 of the Third Age. Sauron is defeated, the Dark Years have come to an end. It's a new era, one that should bring peace and prosperity. But a new era means new challenges, and there are immediate challenges that must be overcome, not least by Isildur. Isildur returns to Gondor immediately following the war. His father Elendil and his younger brother Anarion were both killed in the war, leaving Isildur as the strongest claimant for the thrones of both Arnor and Gondor. A man of great pride, Isildur decides to follow in his father's footsteps, and declares himself High King of both Arnor and Gondor. He still has work to do in Gondor, but he intends to eventually take up residence in Arnor, whilst committing the rulership of Gondor to his nephew, Meneldil. Isildur spends a year in Gondor, organising the realm and its borders, and he's eventually ready to depart north in year 2. In early September, Isildur departs from the east gate of Osgiliath, saying farewell to Meneldil. Accompanying him are 200 knights and soldiers of Arnor, as well as his 3 eldest sons, Elendur, Aratan, and Cirion. The remnants of Arnor's army had already earlier returned, taking the old Númenórean road through Calenardon and the Gap. But Isildur wasn't planning on going this way because he was planning on stopping in Imladris first. There's 2 reasons for that. His wife and his youngest son, Valandil, a boy of 13, still remain there. And secondly, Isildur was seeking advice on the One Ring, which he himself had cut from Sauron's hand. In the 2 years since he had carried it, Isildur had written about it at great lengths. And what we know from Isildur himself is that even just touching the One Ring caused him great pain. And later, Isildur admits that he knows he does not have the strength to wield it, and that he intends to take it to the Keepers of the Three, either Galadriel, Elrond, or Círdan. Isildur's company heads north, crossing Dagorlad, the Brown Lands, and eventually reaches the eastern bank of the Anduin south of the Eaves of Greenwood. They plan on following the Anduin north, and presumably intend on crossing the river at the Carrock, and then moving through the High Pass into Eriador. However, on the 20th day of the journey, rains from the east cause the banks of the Anduin to break, so Isildur's company moves away from the river, instead marching on the higher ground closer to the borders of Greenwood. By the 30th day, the company had reached the northern borders of the Gladden Fields, and their spirits were high as they had now completed 3/4 of the journey. Soon they would be able to rest. However, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the shouts of orcs suddenly shattered the peace. Isildur, assuming all his enemies destroyed, had not been expecting foes. The slopes leading from the forests were covered with orcs, and despite the darkness, the Dunedain knew they were massively outnumbered, possibly even 10 to 1. Isildur orders his men into an Afangail, a double-ranked shield wall that could be bent back into a circle if required. However, neither Isildur and Elendur are confident in their chances. They are greatly outnumbered, and there is no help nearby. They've long since passed Khazad-dûm and Lórien, and Thranduil's people are still 4 days' march ahead. Furthermore, Elendur notes that Isildur carries something that is worth far more than anyone realises, and that it cannot fall into enemy hands. Fearing that the worst may come to pass, Isildur then turns to his esquire, Otar, and commands him to take a companion and bear the shards of Narsil back to Imladris at any cost. As Otar and his companion flee, the orcs commence their first assault. They use the high ground to shoot arrows at the Dunedain, but these arrows can't pierce their Númenórean armour. They then hurl their best warriors against the Dunedain shield wall, but the Dunedain are far stronger and have better reach, so this assault is fended off with relative ease, and the orcs take heavy losses and retreat. Isildur takes this opportunity to resume the march, hoping to reach flatter ground so that the orcs no longer have the slopes as an advantage. He expects that the orcs might be demoralised after the failed attack, and won't launch a second attack. However, he's mistaken, as these orcs are commanded directly by Sauron's servants from Barad-dûr, who have no idea of Sauron's defeat, and unknown to Isildur, the evil from the One Ring is calling out to all nearby evil creatures. Isildur's company hadn't even made it another mile when the orcs came back in strength, this time changing their strategy. Using their numerical advantage, they slowly but surely surrounded the Dunedain, being careful to stay out of range of the Númenórean steel bows. Not that it makes a massive difference anyway, as Isildur only has 20 archers with him. At this point, Elendur asks Isildur if he can use the One Ring to command the creatures, but Isildur states that he can't. At that moment, the orcs attack a second time, across the entire front. Orcs literally throw themselves at the Dunedain, using the weight of their numbers to batter down the shield wall. Once a Dunedain is knocked down to the ground, other Orcs drag them out and kill them. Using this strategy, the Orcs take massive losses, often losing 5 for every Dunedain killed. But the numbers are still on their side. Cirion, Isildur's third son, is dragged out and slain at this point. His older brother, Aratan, attempts to save him, but is mortally wounded in the attempt. Seeing the situation rapidly collapsing, Elendil returns to his father, bidding him to take the One Ring and flee. Isildur reluctantly agrees, bids farewell to his son, and puts on the One Ring and escapes into the night. The men he leaves behind are shortly afterwards overwhelmed, and although they've made the enemy pay dearly, the Dunedain are utterly destroyed. So what happened to Isildur? In Middle-earth, no one knew for certain, only that he also perished sometime that night. It's known that he eventually made it to the Anduin, as much of his gear was found on the eastern bank of the river, but there was no evidence of him on the western bank. There was, however, evidence of Orcish camps on the western bank, clearly there to kill anyone who attempted to flee. All evidence suggested that Isildur either drowned or was killed by Orcs as he gained the western shore. And that isn't far from the truth. Upon entering the river, Isildur was swept southwards, and despite his struggles, he could not swim against the current. Eventually, he did reach the western bank, and at that moment, he realizes that he had lost the One Ring. Moments later, Orcs that were prowling the western bank spotted him, loosed their arrows, and fled, for all they could see in the dark was a 7-foot monster looming up out of the water. These arrows were enough. Isildur was pierced in the heart and in the throat, instantly dead, and he fell silently back into the river. The Disaster of Gladden Fields was over, but the aftermath was only just beginning. At the site of the battle, the victorious Orcs would have begun mutilating the bodies, but this was not to be. Nearby woodmen had become aware of the battle and had sent messages to Thranduil, whilst they were also gathering their own forces. The Orcs, weakened by the battle and unprepared for another battle, were easily defeated by the woodmen. This was lucky for Estelmo, Elendil's own esquire. He was stunned by a club in the final moments of the battle, and had only survived because Elendil's body had fallen on top of him. He was the third and last survivor of the battle. The deaths of Isildur and his sons would have a huge impact on Gondor and Arnor. With Isildur's 3 elder sons dead, especially Elendil, who was described as being most like Elendil, this left the throne of Arnor in the hands of Valandil, a lad of only 13, and one who would never get to know his father and brothers. I only mention the throne of Arnor because Arnor is the only throne that Valandil claims. The High Kingship is abolished, and Gondor and Arnor become fully independent from each other, and although they're still allied, they grow estranged from each other, creating dire consequences in the future. But the biggest loss is that of the One Ring. It now lies on the bed of the Anduin, beyond the reach of men, elves, or any creature of Sauron. Thousands of years later, it would be found out of sheer luck, but many wars and many lives of men lie in between. Bereft of the wisdom and the strength of Elendil and his sons, the realms in exile would face new challenges, great and small. But that's a story for the next episode. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, or at least found it interesting. If you want to know more about the Disaster of Gladden Fields, what better way than to read it yourself? You can find the whole thing in the Unfinished Tales. It's not a long read, but it's a good one nonetheless. Next video will be on the antagonists of this video, the dreaded Orcs of the Misty Mountains, so stay tuned, and remember, shortcuts get people killed.